One of the good news had sounded something like this: the great God of heaven has come to evaluate your behavior, and he's going to reward those who are good. Because I think a lot of times that's sort of how we live or think. But that's not the good news of Jesus. Jesus told his parables to opponents, people who are critical of that simple good news, that the good news, the gospel, Jesus' message, his whole purpose in life was to save poor, desperately poor, spiritually poor sinners. And so Jesus tells parable after parable after parable to these opponents. If you look at the setting, every one of them he's talking to people who opposed the gospel of Jesus that is completely undeserved, unearned. They were so used to keeping a set of rules that they had concocted so that they could assure themselves that God was happy with them. And they were so used to looking down at other people, critical of them, that they were satisfied in themselves. So Jesus tells this story in Matthew 21. Tell me what you think of this story. Jesus says to the scribes in this time, a man had 2 sons. He went up to the first and said, "Son, go out for the day and work in the vineyard." The son answered, "I don't want to." But later on, he thought better of it, and he went. The father gave the same command to the second son. He answered, "Sure, glad to," but never went. Then Jesus asked, "Which of these 2 sons did what the father asked?" The scribe said, "The first." And Jesus said, "Yes, and I tell you that crooks and whores are going to precede you in God's kingdom. You are like the son who promised to obey his father's command, but afterward he neglected to fulfill his promise." It's words like that Jesus speaks every time he tells a good news parable. The parable of the lost sheep, what is it? Jesus is eating with sinners and prostitutes, or people who have careers that are illegitimate, or people who have lifestyles that the moral think don't belong. And those are the people Jesus is eating with, and they're already critical of him. And so Jesus tells parables to justify, to defend, to vindicate the good news and God himself. See, Jesus has given his invitation to this good news to everybody. But the self-satisfied don't accept it. And the self-satisfied, the self-righteous, despise those that need it. They don't think they do. The good news is for those who know they are poor sinners and who are unable to pay their sin. That's most clearly taught in the parable Jesus teaches about the 2 debtors. They're both in debt. One for 500,000 and another for 5,000, but neither of them could pay, was the point. So it doesn't matter if you think you have sinned less than somebody else, or yours aren't as gross or bad. The point is, none of us can pay. The debt's too big, whoever you are. When the Bible talks about sinners and publicans, it's using 2 different words, and 2 different ideas. You see, the self-righteous looked at some people who they thought their lifestyles made them beyond hope. We do that today, too. We look at people and say, wow, their lifestyle puts them beyond Jesus' hope. But then there are other people whose occupations are so immoral. And so in Jesus' day, it was the tax collectors, because they were known to cheat people on purpose so that they could make themselves richer, that people thought made them beyond hope. There'd be no hope that those people would be able to be acceptable by God. And so Jesus then says to those people, again, who are self-righteous in their own eyes, he said, well, the sick go to the doctor. People who know they're sick go to the doctor. Sometimes we go to the doctor when we don't know we're sick and we find out we are. But usually we go to the doctor when we're sick. I don't like to go to the doctor. Do you? I mean, I don't really want to just show up there. But there are times I know I'm desperate. And Jesus said, don't you understand? That's why I gather them into my company. We looked at the parable. Well, it wasn't a parable, the account. There's a parable embedded in it, the story of the prostitute and Simon the Pharisee. And do you remember what Jesus says to Simon about the woman? Therefore I say to you that God must have forgiven her sins, many as they are, since she shows such deep, thankful love. So first, in all of Jesus' parable teaching, defending the good news, he establishes the fact that the good news is for those who understand, who recognize that they are spiritually poor sinners who are unable to pay their sin debt. That's who it's for. And so if you ever find yourself self-satisfied, oh, I'm better than the next guy, or as I see the laws, I keep them. Well, at least I keep the ones I think are important to keep, and I overlook the others, right? But unless you see yourself and understand that you are desperate, that you can't pay your debt, you won't accept the good news. The good news is for those who recognize they are poor, desperate, hopeless sinners.